As we start of in the early 20th century, human evolution has hit a turning point. Most scientists have predicted a future that is more advanced, where the world is more civilized and more intelligent. But as time went on, with humans being at the top of the food chain with no natural predators to challenge anyone's intelligence, these aspirations slowly headed in the wrong direction. Throughout time, people with higher IQs held off from having children while those with lower IQs didn't stop, resulting in people rapidly growing dumber as time went on. With the world's intelligence level slowly decreasing, we're brought to the year 2005 with Corporal Joe Bowers, a U.S. Army librarian labeled as the Army's most average. He's approached by a senior officer who explains that he must take part in a secret experiment. Joe is visibly annoyed at this as he had planned to stay at his current position until retirement, but as he has no choice in the matter, he follows the Joe is visibly annoyed at this as he had planned to stay at his current position until retirement, but as he has no choice in the matter, he follows the senior. We're taken to a conference meeting where Lieutenant Collins explains the details of the human hibernation experiment, which involves candidates being placed into a dry freeze for 1 year. As he dives further into the purpose of this experiment and why he chose Joe as a candidate, he explains that a woman is also required for this. Although, as they were not able to find a perfect candidate in the Army, they decided to venture out into a more private sector, where we're introduced to Rita. In order to use Rita in this experiment, permission from her pimp, Upgrade was granted, providing that there were certain leeways with the local authorities in running his pimp game. The next day, Joe and Rita are in the waiting room. He tries to start some small talk by asking what line of work she's in, but with Rita being too embarrassed about her profession as a prostitute, she claims she's a painter. Following this, they are both put on IV and placed into their hibernation pods, until Rita panics and attempts to leave, but he reassures her that the scientists behind this know what they're doing. After the moment of hesitation, they are eventually locked in their pods with the intent to be awakened a year later, but this experiment is soon forgotten as the officer in charge, Lieutenant Collins, is arrested for having started his own prostitution ring with Upgrade. As a result of this scandal, the base was closed, and because of the level of secrecy towards the experiment, they were simply forgotten. As years pass by, with Joe and Rita still contained within the hibernation pods, mankind has become more stupid at a frightening rate, until humanity has become incapable of solving the most simple problem, such as garbage disposal. In the year 2505, with intelligence charts at an all-time low and with the smartest scientists focusing on irrelevant experiments like trying to reverse hair loss and prolong erections, centuries worth of garbage has stacked up as high as mountains. This soon turns bad as it causes the creation of the Great Garbage Avalanche of 2505, which causes Joe's hibernation pod to crash through the window of a random house. As the man is watching TV, the pod unlocks and Joe slowly arises. He's dazed and visibly confused as he begins to ask for Officer Collins, but the resident throws him out of the window. Completely unaware of what year it is, Joe wanders the streets desperate for help, but with everyone's IQ now extremely low, the English language has deteriorated into a hybrid of hillbilly, inner city slang and more. As he asks for help, he can understand what other people are saying, but when he spoke in an ordinary voice, he sounded pompous and unordinary to them. Feeling overwhelmed and dizzy, Joe makes his way to a nearby hospital and explains to the receptionist what has happened. As he's talking, she is visibly confused as her finger hovers over buttons with pictures on it, but eventually she presses a random button resulting in a voice telling Joe to go to the diagnostics. Upon getting examined, a doctor approaches him explaining that he is effed up and tarded and calls him slurs that must have been acceptable back in 2005, but definitely not now. After being no help, he asks him to pay a fee of $5 billion, but on the receipt, Joe notices the year 2505 printed out. Originally he thought this was a misprint. Joe finally grasps that he has been in the hibernation pod for 500 years as he notices more documents with the year 2505 on them. In disbelief, Joe rushes to the window only to be alarmed by the current state of the city, with garbage everywhere and cars driving off bridges. The doctor panics as Joe doesn't have a barcode tattoo on his wrist, meaning that he cannot be scanned for the automatic debit payment. Joe rushes out of the hospital and continues to roam the city, but he is soon arrested for not paying the hospital bill and for not having a barcode tattoo. At trial, his defense attorney is funnily enough the man who threw him out the window, known as Frito. Rather than helping him, he stupidly helps convict him as he explains that Joe damaged his house. While Joe is sentenced to prison, Rita has awakened from her pod and slowly realizes how easier it is to continue her profession when the world is populated by morons. The next day, Joe is guided to a poorly designed ID system that renames him as Not Sure. mainly because Joe explained that he wasn't sure about his name as it appears on some form. These details were soon tattooed on his wrist. Following this, he is taken to do a mandatory IQ and aptitude test, which will be used to assign him to a specific job role while in prison. During the test, Joe realizes just how stupid humanity has become as it asks extremely simple addition questions. He's able to answer these correctly and is surprised that those around him aren't able to match shapes. Joe, along with other inmates, are transported to the prison, but he's able to use his superior intelligence to devise an escape plan by simply explaining that he is supposed to be leaving today. After some officers almost catch on to his plan, he's able to create a distraction and escape. He returns to Frito's apartment and desperately pleads for help as he asks if anyone has created a time machine to return to the past. Fortunately, Frito claims that a time machine does exist, but only agrees to help whenever Joe offers him a large sum of money. Upon agreeing to the deal, police bust down the door with hope to locate and arrest Joe again, but at this point they have left to search for Rita. As she's standing at the side of the street, keeping up with her normal routine, Joe and Frito pull up beside her and put her in the car. As they're driving, they explain to Rita that they are going to the location of the time machine, until an alert comes through to the car demanding that they stop. With no intent of stopping, the police disable the car battery, resulting in them traveling on foot. After a whole day of walking, they make it to a Costco where they need to get a train, but as they are waiting for Rita to finish up at the toilet, Joe's barcode tattoo is seen by the security cameras, which alerts local authorities. Just as they are about to leave Rita behind, the train leaves with Frito on it and Joe gets arrested. Although, instead of going to jail, he is brought to the White House as the results of his IQ test indicate that he is the smartest man alive, alerting the attention of the president. As he explains that there must be a mistake, the president enters the room and recruits him as Secretary of the Interior to correct the country's issues. A few days later, following the president promising that Joe will solve the country's food and crop shortages, Dust Bowl and other related matters, all of the secretaries attend a conference meeting. In the midst of Joe demonstrating his intelligence, Frito is tracked down by Joe's security with the purpose of locating the time machine. In order to draw limited suspicion, Joe suggests to examine the crops down beside the museum, as this is where the time machine is located, and after saying a few words with more than 5 characters in them, they were sold. They eventually make it to the crop field, and as Joe's examining it, police officers arrive with Rita as he requested her help. However, she was put into jail as she was caught charging a guy for street corner pleasure and never did anything to him. Therefore she's out on a work release license. As Joe's explaining what's happened, sprinklers begin to spray out Gatorade at them. It's revealed here that the drink company Brondo, the thirst mutilator, has virtually replaced water everywhere. With water being one of the biggest competitors, they started a campaign claiming that water is only good for toilets, therefore this Gatorade drink should be used instead, even for crop irrigation. With this new information, Joe tries to explain to the cabinet that using this drink is not conducive to plant life, but as this brand has brainwashed everyone into thinking that the electrolytes from the drink help everything, they are hesitant to listen. After several hours, Joe gave up and convinced them that he can talk to plants and that they said that they need water, which worked, and the sprinklers were replaced with water. Following on from this, everything was looking good, and Joe was on track to get a full presidential pardon, until riots broke out. For Joe's plan to work, it requires time, but with Brondo's stock now at zero, it's left half of the population unemployed. As a result, angry mobs have took to the streets rioting and screaming for Joe. After many news articles come out criticizing Joe, he is sentenced to a day of rehabilitation. In this time period, this is an execution disguised as a public demolition derby that involves monster trucks chasing after and killing the criminal. With Joe now imprisoned and with methods in place to prevent him escaping again, like attaching a massive rock to him, almost all hope is lost. As audiences gather to witness this rehabilitation, Rita and Frito are getting ready to leave for the time machine, but they notice the rehabilitation being broadcasted. Joe is eventually led into the arena, but the crowds roar as the weaponized monster trucks set on killing him appear from their corners. But Joe is in luck as he is given a car with a interesting object on the front of it. Just as the derby is about to begin, Rita notices a plant that has grown just outside of their room, meaning that Joe's plan worked. Her and Frito rush to the arena as she aims to broadcast the growing crops to prove Joe's innocence, all while he is avoiding getting crushed by the monster trucks. As Rita and Frito get to the arena, she brides the television cameraman to follow Frito to broadcast the growing crops to the world. Following this, she makes her way to the control room and persuades the guard to leave. After getting distracted, Frito and the cameraman finally make it to the crop field and broadcast the growing plants to the world. The crowd is in disbelief at the newly grown crop, including the president, who saves Joe's life and gives him a pardon. At the celebration, the president announces to the crowd that he will be making Joe his new vice president. Following his new promotion, and Rita claiming that she's staying in this time to avoid getting back in her old habits, he decides to stay in this time. Upon making this decision, they are shocked when they find out that the time machine that they have been tracking this whole movie was actually just an amusement park ride. The movie ends with Joe becoming the president, with Rita as the first lady and having the world's 3 smartest children, while Frito had 8 wives and 32 of the world's stupidest children.